You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The Kavanaugh era on the Supreme Court. We're going to get to that. All the bad things we can expect in the coming year. As the Supreme Court, I'm sure, are going to be taking up a lot of interesting hot button issues that, again, they're going to affect our lives. And I think do irreparable damage for the foreseeable future. Again, another reason to get out and vote. But today, the big story to me, Donald Trump put out an op-ed. Maybe you saw it over at USA Today, that Democrats' Medicare for All plan will demolish promises made to seniors. You know, those seniors are all screwed. Because, well, obviously, the Democrats are going to destroy Medicare. And I'm going, really? Someone actually going to believe that it's the Democrats who are going to destroy Social Security and Medicare? When you look at what Larry Kudlow has been saying, that 2019 is going to be the year. 2019 is the year that they're going to go after those entitlements. Going to go get those entitlements. And you go, you know, they're being at least, I guess, honest on a certain level in that, you know, that's been their wet dream for quite some time. But to turn it around and say, well, you know, it's those nasty, evil Democrats. It's them doing it. It's not us. We would never do anything like that. No, we're better than that. You know, it just makes me, you know, there's a kind of sleaze that goes along with this, where you just go, you know, at some point, it's just flat lying. And even the Washington Post said there's not a line, there's not a sentence in the entire article that Trump wrote that's actually factual. There's nothing there that is factual, and you go, nothing, not even his name, maybe just that. But everything else, total BS. And you go, well, what is it? Well, first of all, what they're working on trying to get us to buy, what they're shoveling toward us, is this idea that we're stealing Social Security, we're stealing Medicare from Granny. Sorry, Granny, no Medicare for you. And we're going to give it to all those lazy kids who are in their parents' basements. First, I mean, it's idiotic to make that argument from the start, because obviously the kids living in mom and dad's basement don't use healthcare at nearly the rate that seniors do. And the wet dream for the Republicans has always been privatizing it and putting it into the hands of big corporate special interests, which we've already really done thanks to Obama. I mean, the Affordable Care Act did a lot of that. But I look at this and I just go, you know, at some point, you know, do we not, as a society, just wake up to the reality that they're just lying to us at every opportunity? Trump writes, throughout the year, we have seen Democrats across the country uniting around a new legislative proposal. It's not new. I've been talking about this since, 2010. Or even before that, actually, 2008, 2009. But this legislative proposal that would end Medicare as we know it and take away benefits seniors have paid for their entire lives. They're coming for you, Granny. Dishonestly called Medicare for All, the Democratic proposal would establish a government-run, single-payer healthcare system that eliminates all private and employer-based healthcare plans and would cost an astonishing $32.6 trillion during the first 10 years. Now, that's if everyone were to get into it and you were able to abolish the employer-based plans, which is not the argument. It's also not the argument that it would be government-run healthcare. It would be much like Medicare in government-run payments. And ask Granny if she's against Medicare paying the bills, and no. In fact, the sane, the rational, the intelligent way to go is say, why do we need insurance companies? Why do we need these massive behemoths with huge overhead of CEO salaries and huge overhead of advertising and all of the stuff that goes into it? And oh, by the way, they pay out a lot in handouts to grease wheels. Why do we need that? Why can't we just pay the bills ourselves? And you think back, and I guess I'm just old enough to remember that we used to have community hospitals, that the taxpayers used to fund hospitals in their community because communities wanted hospitals. And we gave tax breaks to rich people because we taxed them at a sufficiently high enough rate that they didn't want to pay money to the government. So they funded a wing to the hospital so they didn't have to pay that tax, but we still benefited from it. And they were community run, community operated. And when the community got sick, guess where the community went? To the community hospital. And you got care. And I look at this op-ed and it's really ageism at its worst. That's the first thing right off the bat. It's attempting to pit seniors against their grandchildren. But they've been doing that for a very long time. And then they throw out this idea that, again, this choice thing, because, seniors, they have a choice. They can take the for-profit Medicare Advantage plan, which has a few more benefits, but is hugely more expensive. They don't bother to tell you that. They don't bother to tell you that the handful of seniors that are in it cost almost as much as everybody else in the other plan. And thanks, George W. Bush, for that. And oh, by the way, they don't bother to tell you that Medicare Part D, we don't negotiate for drug prices. We're the only country in the world that's dumb enough not to do that. So, again, he throws out this idea that the Democratic Party's so-called Medicare for All would really be Medicare for none. And under the Democratic plan, today's Medicare would be forced to die. And you go, today's Medicare would be expanded to everybody else. It's not like they would give up the list of doctors and the rates that they pay and the whole infrastructure that they've built for seniors to have access to. It would just open it up to everyone else, which was my plan from the beginning. The public option should have been a non-starter. It should have been what was minimum. Say, okay, we'll have the private plans, but you'll have a public option and it will be Medicare. Tell me how much it costs for me to buy in and let them compete. You want to talk about competition? You want to talk about choice? But that's not what they're giving you. He goes on to think that Americans might think such extreme anti-senior, anti-choice, anti-consumer proposals for government-run health care would find little support among Democrats in Congress. But oh no, 123 in the House and 15 in the Senate have already signed on. And I'm going, only that? Come on, Democrats, get your heads out of your behinds. This is the future. And then they throw out the open borders because we got to get the immigrants in there. Got to scare people. The others are coming. And they're going to take your health care. They want open borders so people can rush here from other countries. Medical tourists. Kind of like we do to other countries. They'll all come here to get the health care, and you'll have to pay for it, and it'll be rationed. And every canard, every right-wing fear-mongering ridiculous, made-up point of view that they have is in this article, because we're going to be Venezuela. And he even actually throws that in there. The truth is that the centrist Democratic Party is dead. The new Democrats are radical socialists who want to model America's economy after Venezuela. And you go, really? Did I miss that? Did I not get the memo there? Did someone not say, hey, Rick, the Democrats have changed their mind. They're going full bore socialist. I've yet to miss that. It hasn't come. I guess it's like the George Soros checks. I'm still waiting for my George Soros checks. So George, if you got a check with my name on it, by all means, send it my way. But, it's all of this stuff that at some point, we as a society have to push back again. Because understand, if there isn't a viable option on the other side, all we're going to continue to get is, well, what we've got. And that's eventually pay or die kind of healthcare. And that's the scary part of this. At the end of it, we had better figure out how we push back against these kind of lies. Because look, they've got the megaphone. When the president of the United States puts out an op-ed, a newspaper is going to run it. And that they're going to run it just the way they want. And there's not a megaphone on the left to push back on these lies. He finishes off with, and this is the part that just stopped me dead in my tracks. Republicans believe that a Medicare program that was created for seniors and paid for by seniors their entire lives should always be protected and preserved. Let that sink in for, just about a half a second. Have we forgotten the last 20 years of assaults on Medicare? Have we forgotten all of the Bush attempts to privatize Medicare? Have we forgotten all of the Republican assaults, all of the Paul Ryan stuff? Have we forgotten what the Republican Party has actually stood for? And that is the total destruction of Medicare. Now, they can't come right out and say, we're going to destroy it. But what they do is, we're going to privatize portions of it. We're not going to let them negotiate for prescription drugs. We're going to make it so expensive that eventually it goes bust. And they've been doing this for years. And anytime a tweak wants to be done, anytime we're going to try and increase funding towards it, we got to give tax breaks to billionaires. And, there's a moment where I just go, insurance is very simple. Who pays the bill is very simple. We don't need profiteers and huge salaried CEOs. We need one fund. We need the ability to have one giant pot where everyone pays in to mitigate the risks. I mean, this is not rocket science. Understand, in this country, what we do, we take care of the most expensive on the government's dime. And we let the private companies, we let them profit off of the most profitable people possible. With CHIP, we fund the children. And because you understand that healthcare costs are the most expensive in the first 5 years of life and the last 5 years of life. We know that to be the facts. So CHIP covers the majority of kids in this country. So we take out the expensive first 5 years. And once, people hit 65, we take out the last 5 years. So we, the taxpayers, are paying for the most expensive people to get care. And by the way, the disabled and, people with, massive disabilities, who, and the indigent, they end up on Medicaid. So again, we're taking care of the most expensive people to cover. Now, the folks who can get up every day and go to work and work at a job that's going to give them insurance, we let the private market profit off of them. People who pay, like I do, $18,000 a year and might use several $100s a year in healthcare costs. That's who the insurance company loves, because guess what? Lots of profit. Not much in the way of outlays, but lots of premiums coming in. But as soon as you start costing us more, onto the government. as soon as you get older. And this is stuff that at some point we got to wake up to. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Lots to get to. In the next segment, Paul Secunda, our good friend Paul, is going to be here. A law professor, the director of employment law at Marquette University, labor and employment law there at Marquette, going to be here to share some of his thoughts on, well, the Kavanaugh era and what it's going to mean for working people across the country. Quick break. Right back with our good friend Paul Secunda. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day mill workers began to walk off the job at the Phoenix and Gilbert knitting mills in Little Falls, New York. The strike was sandwiched between the Bread and Roses strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and the 1913 Patterson textile strike. American, Hungarian, Polish, and Italian workers, over 70% of them women, struck against wage reductions. Their hours had just been cut from 60 hours a week to 54, and their wages adjusted accordingly. A recent Factory Inspection Commission investigation revealed deplorable working and living conditions, among the worst in the state. As a result, state legislators passed protective legislation restricting women's work hours. Many social reformers pushed for laws like these in the hopes of improving women's quality of life by minimizing their exploitation on the job. But the reduction in hours spelled disaster for these mill women, who then faced a loss of income that ranged between 75 cents and $2 a week. Socialists in nearby Schenectady, including the socialist mayor George Lunn, arrived in town and were promptly arrested for giving open-air speeches in support of the strikers. IWW organizers soon followed to help organize picketing, daily strike parades, and strike committees for each of the factories. They quickly established IWW Local 801, the National Industrial Union of Textile Workers. By the end of the month, mounted police closed in on the women strikers and began clubbing them, many into unconsciousness. The police raided strike headquarters and arrested IWW strike committee leaders. But the women strikers stood strong and were celebrating victory by the end of the year. They won full reinstatement and 60 hours pay for 54 hours work. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We're working on getting Paul on the line. And look, at the end of this, I'm still just beyond infuriated about what the healthcare situation is going to be under Trump. And, you know, this push to destroy, just destroy the entire that American dream that my grandparents' generation fought for. And, you know, I was talking about this the other day because, you know, in addition to the attack on Medicare, you're seeing also an attack on Social Security. And the thing that gets me is we're already heading for a massive retirement crisis in this country. I mean, it's really going to get really ugly very soon. As soon as, you know, the baby boomers, they're going to, especially the younger baby boomers, as soon as they're into retirement age, it's going to start hitting, you know, especially my generation, to where, you know, we were the generation that the experiment happened to. Hey, we have these 401ks. See how wonderful these are? Look at how shiny and sweet and cute dangle. You can be a millionaire. And I remember the day that, I started this job where I spent 18 years. And I remember the guy who, you know, did the little orientation saying to me, you know, Rick, you stay here 30 years and you work hard and you play by the rules. You're going to be a millionaire when you walk out of here in 30 years. You'll be 50 years old and you'll be a millionaire. And I remember going, the reality is the powers to be are never going to let a dumb truck driver have $1 million. It's not going to happen. They're going to figure out a way to steal it, either through high fees or constant, Wall Street crashing constantly, or whatever. And after 18 years, I had about $250,000. It was never going to reach $1 million. And even my 401k, which after the Bush collapse was a 200.5. And it's just one of those things where at some point you go, when do we as a country wake up and start demanding? And this is where even radical self-interest, even if you are a, card-carrying right-wing lunatic, Reagan, Bush, Trump supporter, just the radical self-interest that you've been indoctrinated in believing is a mandate to live in this country, wouldn't you want to make sure that you yourself had at least some semblance of retirement security, just a little bit? Because understand, we are heading for a real crisis. And, we had talked about this back last month in September when the National Institute on Retirement Security came out with their study. And we talked about this. 4 out of 5 people in this country fall short of even the most conservative retirement savings accounts. So we're talking about 80% of the people don't even meet the most conservative targets. And roughly 4 out of the same 4 out of 5 have less than a year's income saved for retirement. I saw a statistic that the majority of 401ks have less than $18,000 in them. And you go, wow, that's remarkable. So if they're saying all this money is there, how much do the wealthy people have in them? And the answer is tons, because it was understand what the 401k was. It was a major tax dodge. It was a way for rich people to hide money. And then they figured out, hey, we could con those working people into believing that they can be rich by opening this up, and then we'll kill off the defined benefit, because we don't want to be responsible for all of that. We'll give them a little incentive, and they'll take it because they're stupid. They're working people. What do they know? And you look at the reality of, less than, right around 3 and 5 have less than 1 year's income saved. According to the report, 57%, or more than 100 million of working age individuals do not own any retirement account assets in an employer-sponsored 401k plan, individual retirement account, or a pension. 57% have nothing. Zip, zilch, nada. Everything that they have is based on, hey, I might get some Social Security if the Republicans don't steal it all. And you go, well, Rick, how'd we get into this mess? How'd we get here? Simple. Republicans went after and destroyed unions. Simple. When I started working, the fact that there was a pension fund there was not even something I was thinking about. It was already there. It's not something I had to fight for, not something I had to argue over. It was there. And I remember going, wow, this is great. I get health care, I get pension, and it's part of what the job entails. Today, a kid, 18-year-old, starts a job, there's no health care, there's no pension. And he's thinking like I was when I was 18, hey, I'm making X amount of dollars. And I'm rich, I'm making all this money. Without thinking about how badly they've been screwed in just 30, 40 years, that they've stolen all of that benefit. And understand the defined benefit was security. And I think of my grandparents who, they retired with that 3-legged stool. A little bit of Social Security, a little bit of a defined benefit pension, a little bit of their personal savings, and they were on firm ground. They retired in their home to the day they died. They had security in their retirement age. They had dignity in their retirement. The sad reality is we're going completely in the wrong direction and backwards. Before Medicare and Medicaid, before the New Deal programs, I think the numbers are like 90% of seniors lived in abject poverty in this country. And now it's completely turned around to where seniors don't suffer the kind of poverty that they used to. And why is that? Smart policy. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. And then yesterday I read a report put out by the AP. And they went into what I've been talking about for years, the difference between, college-educated workers and people who, like me, do manual labor, who, get up every day and their back aches and their arms hurt and their hands are sore, but they get up every day and they go to work and they punch the clock and they do their jobs. You're not going to get someone who does that kind of back-breaking work to work into their 60s, late 60s and 70s. It's never going to happen. Sitting behind a desk pushing papers, most certainly. You can easily go into your 70s. You can easily do that if you're tolerant enough. But for working people, and I've been saying for a while, there's got to be a way of balancing this, of saying, look, and my union does this. I can take my pension at 57 and a half. Now, granted, you're going to pay a number of penalty years on it, but if the bad things happen, you still had the ability to get to get your money. But we punish people who retire early. My union does the same thing, but Social Security, if you were to retire at 66, you'd get, let's say you get $1,000 a month. If you retired at 62, you'd only get $750. But if you lasted till 70 and you added those extra 4 years and your income grew by 8% each year, you'd get, what was it, about $1,300? And you look at this and you just go, when do we wake up and say there's a crisis here? And I know there's some people, well, I did the right thing, I saved. And that's because a lot of people had sufficient incomes. Understand, since the 80s, we've seen an attack on solid wage jobs. And those solid wage jobs used to have benefits. Sadly, today, not so much anymore. And the more I look at this, the more I look at the direction that we're going as a country, I'm waiting for that critical mass moment where the anger that we saw in 2016, and understand, the Trump voters have a point. They were ticked off. They were angry. They were ticked off at Democrats because Democrats were supposed to be the party of working people. And look, I spent the Obama years railing on Obama, not because I didn't like him, but because I thought he should do better. I thought he should know better. I thought he should fight for better. The fact that the Employee Free Choice Act or something considerably better was never even discussed is infuriating to me. And yeah, okay, we got a couple of executive orders, speeding up union elections and doing a little bit of overtime, decent living wage campaigns around federal contracts. Okay, that's not horrible. A couple of things, the raise the rate that you don't have to pay overtime anymore, to where you can call somebody an assistant supervisor and pay them a salary. Okay, that was okay, even though it didn't actually happen. Yeah, but we didn't actually make people's lives better. And this is where the Democratic Party had better learn from those 8 years. And I know 6 of the 8 years, Republicans did everything they could do to gridlock, to block, to obstruct, to delay, to destroy. I get that. To hold the country hostage. Yep, I get all of that. But there were those 2 years where they could have done what the Trump administration has already done, and that's rammed through their priorities. Trump's rammed through their number one priority, and that's stealing from we the people. That's giving massive tax breaks to corporations and big business and to big moneyed interests. And they're in the process of doing it again. Their second priority, doing it again. So I come back to, when do we, as a country, as a working class, regain that class consciousness, regain that concept of solidarity, that idea that we should all do better when we do better, or at least, I work hard, I play by the rules, I should do better. Just kind of a thought. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. I'm just literally out of my mind on this stuff. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1913. At 2:02 in the afternoon, President Woodrow Wilson at the White House touched off an explosion at the Gamboa Dike in Panama. With that touch of a button, the last barrier to joining the waters of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Panama Canal went up in smoke. The Chicago Tribune described the scene in Panama, writing, quote, "Then suddenly came the muffled roar of the discharge of 1,600 pounds of dynamite, which sent a shower of water, mud, and rock high into the air. Spreading out as it went upward, the whole heavily veiled into a cloud of smoke. As water began to pour through the rent made by the explosion, the crowd sent up a great cheer. It was a noteworthy moment in the construction of the canal, but that moment came at a staggering cost of workers' lives. For more than 20 years, the French and then the United States worked on the canal project. The U.S. phase lasted for a decade. As many as 45,000 workers toiled on the canal during the peak years of construction. These workers came from the United States, Europe, Asia, and Panama. West Indians formed the core of the work crews. These workers faced stifling heat, brutal working conditions, and poor accommodations. Workers had to contend with ravaging disease, poisonous snakes, and torrential rains. Workers also faced racial discrimination. For example, West Indian workers earned half the hourly wages of U.S. and European workers. They also lived in much more crowded barracks. Worker deaths were so frequent that death or funerary trains made continual runs to bring the bodies away from the construction site. It is estimated that more than 27,000 men died building the canal. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The cages full, stay awake in the dark, count mistakes. The light is out.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
The day is new, and everyone is waiting on you.
717-422-5215, the number if you've got thoughts. Gotten a bunch of emails here during the break on people telling their healthcare stories. In fact, Rebecca in the chat room said that, happened to her. The reality is paid, all those years for healthcare, paid years, used it once and then got canceled. And look, those stories are out there. Before the Affordable Care Act, it was the Wild West. I look at those mini plans that we used to get, that people would get, especially working in the fast food industry, that covered nothing. Nothing whatsoever. But hey, you had insurance. And what it really was is, if you had a heart attack, you got some bit of care. But it was going to bankrupt you for a generation. And whenever I talk about healthcare, I think back to moments where we used to do these food drives, Hungry and Homeless for the holidays. We, for a number of years, we would stay out in the supermarket parking lot for 9-10 days. And we would live there, and we would raise food and money for the the food bank and the homeless shelter, and we would get people to come and talk with us and share their stories, and person after person, especially around the time when the Affordable Care Act was being discussed and pushed through, I had people come and say, look, if it weren't for the ACA, I wouldn't be here today because I got health care, I got to go to the doctor, I got to have this whatever this on my arm looked at. And turns out it was cancerous. And if I'd had let it go, it would have killed me. I always think about the guy who spent time with us during one of the weeks that we were there, a homeless veteran, conservative homeless veteran who worked his entire life but had a heart attack, ended up losing his job, ended up losing his house, ended up losing everything. But we as a society, paid for his healthcare costs because as soon as he had the heart attack, everything else went. He had a stroke. He had all kinds of stuff that we covered. The only thing we didn't cover was a place for him to live. We literally spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep this guy alive, only to shovel him out onto the streets. And for that week he spent with us, he said, it's the first time that he had felt safe in forever. And, it's one of those moments where you go, at some point, do you not just say enough already? And I got a bunch of these responses from people saying, look, Rick, I need this care. I need this insurance. And, we've got tons of stories of people talking about the ACA and talking about how it saved their lives. And look, I think the ACA should have been better. I think we should have done better with it. I think it should have been better coverage. I think it should have been cheaper. I think it should have had a lot more to it. But understand, it was the first step. And as I said back then, I hope it takes the path of Medicare, because at the beginning, Medicare wasn't that great either. It was with lots of years of tweaking and lots of years of making things better, and we the people demanding better for our seniors, that it got to the point to where, if you would have threatened to take Medicare from my grandmother, she'd have beat you with her walker. There's no question about that. And that's what's frustrating to me, because, healthcare is one of those really personal things that we should be demanding. And I fear the direction that we're taking, especially with Trump in the White House and this Supreme Court. I fear we're heading for very difficult times. And I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk with our good friend Paul Secunda about what this court's going to look like, what we're going to see in the coming weeks and months, and possibly the coming years. So stick around. Right back after this with our good friend Paul. Stick around.
When the kids are united, they can never be divided. As yesterday, there's a brand new show today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. A new UN climate report confirms scientists' worst fears. The world may be just 12 years away from triggering severe, irreversible effects of global warming that a 2015 climate treaty aimed to thwart. To prevent the most dire consequences of that warming, the report said the world needs to embark on rapid and far-reaching transitions in energy production, land use, infrastructure, and industry. Such an effort, which some have equated to the U.S. mobilization in World War II, would need to play out in every country at the same time and without delay. But even that Herculean effort wouldn't stop many of global warming's long-term effects. Sea level rise, for instance, could continue for centuries, even once carbon emissions are capped, since warmer air will keep melting ice sheets and glaciers. Benjamin Preston leads the Infrastructure Resilience and Environmental Policy Program at the RAND Corporation.
We've somewhat locked ourselves into a significant amount of climate change and therefore climate change consequences that have to be managed.
But the increasing inevitability of climate change doesn't mean steps to limit it are in vain. When heads of state signed the Paris Agreement in 2015, they pledged to cap warming since the pre-industrial era at 2 degrees Celsius, and they put in italics that they'd love it if warming could be capped at 1.5 degrees. If warming hits 2 degrees instead of that 1.5 target, twice the number of species would lose their habitats, the Antarctic ice sheet would be doomed to irreversible melting, and twice the number of humans would face water crises. In other words, greater ambition now would buy the planet precious extra time to adapt.
That's really the big challenge, not just for cities and human beings, but also for natural ecosystems. Giving them the time to adjust, to make investments, to migrate, to implement these changes, the more time we can buy human and natural systems to do that, the better off we're going to be.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. The Rick Smith Show.
So this week begins the Kavanaugh era, and I would argue not in a good way. I look at the what the Supreme Court did with North Dakota yesterday, and not thrilled. Now, Kavanaugh wasn't a part of that, but still not a good direction. And here to share some thoughts on where we see the Supreme Court going in the coming weeks, months, and, well, years ahead. What's it going to mean for workers? What's it going to mean for consumers, for minorities, for the LGBT community? What's it going to mean for, well, the 20th century legacy? and here to share some thoughts on where what we can expect, where things may end up, and, well, just how bad it's going to be. I've asked our good friend Paul Secunda, professor of law and director of the Labor of Employment Law program there at Marquette University, to come talk with us. Paul, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rick.
So
it's not good. There's no sugarcoating this, Rick. It's really bad. And so next time someone tells you that there are moderate Republicans like Susan Collins and Jeff Flake and what's his name, the other guy from Tennessee, they're not moderate. They're all ideologues, and now we are stuck with 5 hard right ideologues on the Supreme Court, at least until some of these guys drop off, so to speak.
Yeah, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. I mean,
I don't know. Clarence Thomas isn't the most healthiest man in the world, so we'll see. I mean, you never know. You never know. Life is funny.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
But the fear that I have is John Roberts is the moderate on the court.
Yeah, he's the swing vote, believe it or not. So we went from Sandra Day O'Connor being the swing vote up until 2006 till Anthony Kennedy moving further right being the swing vote in 2018. And now we were with Chief Justice Roberts as the swing vote. And this man doesn't believe in affirmative action. He doesn't believe in minority rights. He doesn't believe in LGBT rights. He doesn't believe in labor rights. He doesn't believe in worker rights. He doesn't believe in civil rights. You can look far and wide through his opinions, and you can make a lot of statements about Anthony Kennedy. He wasn't great. He was not exactly the most pro-employee, pro-labor person in the world. But you remember, he's the one who wrote Lawrence v. Texas. He's the one who wrote Obergefell, essentially allowing same-sex marriage. I mean, so he had this thought, which you might call libertarian, which I think liberals understand libertarianism, which is, get the government out of your bedroom. It's none of their business what goes on your bedroom or anywhere else in private. So I think Kennedy got that. I'm not sure Kavanaugh does. And you saw in his testimony his anger, his partisanship, his, frankly, lack of judicial temperament that is going to haunt this court, not just in its decisions, Rick, but in its being considered legitimate by a large section of this country.
Yeah.
Usually the Supreme Court's out there leading. Brown versus Board of Education. Separate is inherently unequal. Other cases like Obergefell, same-sex marriage. Now we have a Supreme Court that is literally looking backwards. You can't even say the 20th century. You might even say the 19th century.
So you wouldn't say
look at women's rights.
Right. So you wouldn't say that I was being hyperbolic when I say that the 20th century is under assault.
The 20th century is under assault, but I think we're back to the Lochner days. Lochner, for listeners who don't know, is when a very conservative Supreme Court between about 1905 and 1935, so a whole generation, basically struck down 150 state laws that sought to protect workers in the workplace. And they did so under this idea of freedom of contract, which sounds harmless enough. But what they were basically saying is we can't have legislation that protects workers because that interferes with the rights of employees and employers to contract as they see fit. Well, as we all know, there's no such thing as equal bargaining between employers and employees. It's a one-sided, one-way tilted contract where employers do what they want and employees take what they must. It is collective begging, as we've talked about, when you don't have a union. And so this is where we're at now. We had the Epic Systems decision in May, which basically took away people's right to a judicial forum, to a jury trial. Everything has to be tried one-on-one, no class actions. It's made it almost impossible for employees to win, just on basic wage, overtime, unemployment, you name it.
Yeah.
Everything has become difficult, and it's only going to get worse because this guy Kavanaugh, he doesn't believe in workers' rights. He doesn't understand unions, let alone people who should have rights even outside of unions. So I'd like to be positive here, but the big issues that are going to be coming up in the next year or two, issues like sexual orientation discrimination, transgendered rights, this guy is exactly the same person as Donald Trump. What has Donald Trump done with regard to LGBT? What has Donald Trump done with regard to labor rights? He has restricted them in every conceivable way possible.
Yeah.
There's not one positive thing that he's done.
No, there's not. And look at Kavanaugh as an extremist operative. I mean, you look at the path to get here, and you go, just the path he took to get where he's at should preclude him from being on the court at all because he's a political operative.
They hid 90% of the paperwork about him from his time doing the Whitewater and the Clinton impeachment proceedings, because he was the one who insisted on asking these questions of President Clinton that were completely outside the scope of the investigation at the time. And now we hear these things being taped from Trump. We hear that Kavanaugh himself was engaged, allegedly, in this type of behavior. But I'll tell you what, Rick, we'll never know whether Kavanaugh did what these women say he did. I personally believe that he did, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that he is a liar, and it is shown that he's lied between his testimony in 2006 when he was up for the D.C. Circuit and now when he's up on this court, 2018. I think at least 9 separate lies that I've seen in the papers. And on top of that, he has a judicial temperament where he's telling the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee that the Clintons are behind them attacking him. Do you understand how
paranoid
outrageous that is?
No, and I remember watching it going, wow, even if you don't buy, Dr. Ford's testimony, which I as well did, this is not somebody you want. This is somebody you expect to see on a street corner screaming at you as you're driving by, not somebody who's going to be seated on the highest court in the land.
Well, the good news is if you're a business person, if you have a lot of money, if you're, got the last name Koch and one of 2 brothers, it's all good. Because the rich are going to get richer, the poor are going to get poorer, the business interests are going to be stomping all over employee interests. And what we see as inequality in this country is just going to get worse and worse because this block of justices, these 5 men, they are only concerned about those who already have resources and who have money. They do not care about the average Joe and Jane who's making their way every day, working 2, 3 jobs, trying to make a living, trying to survive, trying to feed their children, trying to pay the electric bill. They don't care. It's not in their concern. And these people, let me tell you something, it's much more than just this, idea that Kavanaugh came through, the Clinton impeachment and all the Ken Starr nonsense that went on back in the 1990s. It's also that Gorsuch and Alito and Roberts, they're all members of this group called the Federalist Society. Have you heard of the Federalist Society?
Yep.
Yeah, the Federalist Society is a group of like-minded conservative legal scholars whose sole purpose is to populate the bench. And by the bench, I mean the federal bench at the trial level, at the appellate level, at the Supreme Court level, with as many conservatives as they possibly can. And with Mitch McConnell as their ringleader, they have put more conservative jurists on more courts than Obama ever could or did because the Democrats never so-called used the nuclear option in order to kind of overcome all the filibusters that were used, the blue slips that were used to block his nominee. So what I want to get across to your listeners is the Supreme Court's bad. But guess what? Only about 80 to 100 cases go to the Supreme Court every year. And most of them are, not labor and employment, don't deal with civil rights, don't deal with the issues that we care about. But those appellate courts that decide cases, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them, the district courts, 10,000 cases, they are now stocked with the same conservative men and women who make up the Federal Society, the same ilk as Brett Kavanaugh and worse. And that's what we should be concerned about.
No, I mean, the whole judiciary has been infested with crazy. And at the end of it, most of them are of this original intent idea, which, I've been saying for a while is to put women back in the kitchen, gays back in the closet, and blacks back in the fields. Correct.
I mean, blacks under the original Constitution were 3/5 of a person. So, I mean, think of it this way. The original Constitution, I mean, first of all, it's kind of just ludicrous to think that the Constitution is a dormant document that's meant to be kind of from 1791 or whenever the Bill of Rights were ratified. Right? This idea that we can say that what would have happened in 1791 makes sense today in 2018 is not just nonsensical, it's bizarre. As I like to tell my students, it's like asking what would Jefferson have done if he had a television in Monticello. We can't answer that question because television can exist for another 150 years. We can't make things up. And by the way, that's what's happening, right? Because you can't actually predict what these people would have done if they knew of our current reality, the information. Forget the Industrial Revolution, the information revolution. How they would have handled that, we have no idea. We have to work with cases and other types of legislative history, other types of judicial canons of interpretation to make our Constitution a living one that can respond to the realities of today. Instead, these people are trying to say, hey, what's good in 1790 is good in 2018. Well, as you said, no rights for women, no rights for people of color, no rights for people who like the same sex orientation. None of this is part of our history. In fact, we fought a civil war, if you recall, Rick, to get rid of slavery out of this country.
Yeah.
And now in economic ways, in political ways, in social ways, we are introducing that same inequality, all because there's a bunch of scared white conservative men who are trying to hold on to power for dear life.
I look at this, and again, as you look at the future, you go, how bad's it going to get? You've said it's bad. I've had conservatives tell me, no, you're being outrageous. Roe versus Wade isn't going anywhere. It's decided law. Kavanaugh already said he's not. It's decided he's not going to overturn precedent. But I look at what's happened over the last several years, and I don't buy any of it.
Rick? You mean like a boo to settled law after 40 years? Gee, Janice didn't seem to care about that, did they? Right?
No, not at
No,
all.
public unions are now imperiled because 40 years of precedent was thrown out the window. Roe v. Wade, I'll make a prediction on this one. It will not be overturned in just like one decision, but it will die a death of 1,000 cuts. It will die a death of 1,000 sabotages, so that at the end of the day, women will not have reproductive choice. And the thing that kills me about that is that it's Susan Collins and the other Republican women, Deborah Fisher from Nebraska, Joni Ernst from Iowa. They're the ones who really, I know this sounds kind of bad that I'm, saying that the women should have stood up, but at the end of the day, whether you're conservative or progressive, it shouldn't make a difference. Women have the right to do with their bodies what they want. This is as American as any other concept that we have.
Yeah, but Paul, isn't the reality, that you're talking about women of means? Even when abortion was illegal, women of means still had access to the care, and they always will. What we're talking about are poor working class women who are not going to have options anymore.
And that gets back to the point you made before the commercial about Obamacare. Obamacare is being sabotaged. It's also dying a death of 1,000 cuts. And one of the first things that's gone is the Medicaid expansion. The expansion under the Affordable Care Act, which would allow people at a much higher income level, up to 133% of the federal poverty level, to receive Medicaid benefits, including nursing home, long-term care, 24/7 custodial care in their house. That's now gone. Now you're down to 100%. You have to qualify for one of the categories, whether you're being disabled or under a certain income or asset class. They've totally demolished the expansion that was meant for Medicare to help the poor. And what's ironic is, of course, all the Democratic governors have allowed the Medicaid expansion to go forward, but all the Republican governors in the exact states where you have the poorest people didn't allow the Medicaid expansion to go. So we're actually punishing people for voting for the party. This is, to me, the biggest question, right? How can it be that all these Republicans whose economic self-interest lies with the Democratic Party and those who fight for workers' rights consistently vote for people who screw them over?
Well, I think it's simple.
Scam them and consistently make choices which is against their economic self-interest. This is the question that keeps me up at night. I have no idea.
Well, some of the people that I know, again, the original intentists are we want women back in the kitchen, gays back in the closet, and blacks back in the field.
Can I tell you where I want women in black? I want them to control the country. I want women in black to take over from these crazy white men. That's what I want.
No, I've been saying
Because
it for a
I'll tell
long
you
time. I want more women in the Senate who aren't Susan Collins.
Yeah, not Susan Collins, not Deborah Fisher, not Jody Ernst. Glad Nikki Haley's gone, although we're probably going to get something worse in the United Nations. But there are good women. You know, the Kirsten Gillibrand, Amy Klobuchar spoke eloquently at the Kavanaugh nomination, if you recall, from Minnesota. Kamala Harris is a rising star out in California. There are good women who are running at all levels of government. We need to support them. We need to go out, and the only way we're going to change this, Rick, is by voting. We need to vote, and we need to vote in big numbers. We need to be enthusiastic. We need to support our brothers and sisters, no matter what their color, no matter what their orientation, and we need to vote these crazy people out. The damage is already significant.
Yeah.
But if you think we've hit bottom, we haven't. It could get a lot worse.
No, it's going to get a lot worse soon. So last line of questioning I have for you then, because, there are some people going, okay, so is there anything we can do? Let's say, Trump is found to have, colluded with the Russians, and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, their nominations were illegitimate. Is there a way you can go back on this? Someone in the chat room asked if you read Article 3 as an absolute in stating that Supreme Court justices are lifetime appointments. What can we be doing?
Well, that's not what Article 3 says. Article 3, Section 1 says lifetime appointment as long as there's good behavior, which means judges at all levels, whether it be Supreme Court justices or district court, who are the trial judges in the federal system, can be impeached. And so I do expect that if and when, and I hope the Democrats at least take over the House, there will be an investigation into Kavanaugh's background. Because remember, they did this kind of sham FBI investigation without interviewing him, without interviewing Dr. Ford or the other women who came forward, without interviewing his friends, apparently, who knew about these various incidents, that he was a well-known drunk on campus. So this is something that can happen, and it's not absolute Article 3. If you read Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution, it says you have a lifetime appointment as long as you engage in good behavior, which means if someone is involved in criminal behavior, intentional torts, or other serious misconduct, they can be removed. We had a judge, just to give you a historical precedent here, named Abe Fortas. I don't know if this was before your time, Rick.
Well, before
I think I'm predating you here a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
But Abe Fortas was a justice on the Supreme Court in the 1960s, and he was Johnson's pick to be the Chief Justice. Well, turned out, and he was a Democrat, I hate to say this, but he was involved in financial misdealings. They were going to impeach him. He resigned before they could impeach him. Same thing, obviously, of course, happened with Nixon. With his removal, he resigned before he could be impeached. I do think a number of these judges, a number of the officials that are potentially going to be found to have engaged in illegal conduct can be held accountable with a Democratic Congress. This is why it's so important for people in your state, in Pennsylvania, in my state, Wisconsin, the two states that are, along with Michigan, responsible for this abomination that we're dealing with right now, to get out to vote. Every single person. Take 10 people with you. Take 20 people with you. Please, please vote. It is the only way in a democracy we can make things right again.
And that's the perfect place to leave this. On November 6th, everyone march to the polls. And as I've been saying, I want to see the biggest march in the history of the country right to your local polling place. Paul, great talking with you. I'd love to have you back again, pick this up, because this isn't going away anytime soon.
Whenever you want me, Rick.
Good stuff. Thanks so much. Our good friend Paul Secunda. Look, at the end of it, he's right. Got to vote. Got to vote. That's simple. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Listen, can you hear it? Listen to the eerie sound of silence from the trumpeteers and congressional Republicans who so loudly cheered themselves just a year ago for bestowing $1 trillion tax giveaway on corporate elites. They told us they did it not for the rich, but to help the middle class and poor families. How would enriching the already rich benefit the rest of us? Trickle-down economics 101, said Trump and company, explaining that giving more money to elites would spark, quote, an immediate jump in wage growth, because CEOs would use their bonanza to reward workers for their productivity. The White House even got specific, declaring that average pay would jump as much as $9,000 per person. But here we are in the thick of the 2018 congressional elections, and shh, silence. Not a single lawmaker who voted for this grand ideological promise is mentioning it, much less running ads touting their role and hammering the plan into law. Why so shy? Because their trickle-down giveaway was a crude hoax from the start. CEOs spent the GOP's trillion-dollar boondoggle on lifting their own exorbitant pay. Moneyed elites got the gold mine, working families got the shaft. Far from a $9,000 income boost, the workaday majority of Americans now find that their hourly earnings are lower than a year ago. But who cares? Being a trumpeter Republican means never admitting your lies and never apologizing. Steve Mnuchin, a former Wall Street banker who's now the Treasury Secretary, is a perfect example of a blasé, ethically challenged Trump huckster. He recently shrugged off the failure of the bloated tax cut to raise working people's income. Wages are going up on some people, he declared disingenuously. This is Jim Hightower saying, yeah, for multimillionaires like him. Yet he wonders why most Americans despise him and his ilk.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
This little song is more to the point. Roll out the barrel and lend me your ears. I like beer. It makes me a jolly good fellow. I like beer. It helps me unwind, and sometimes it makes me feel mellow.
I'll tell you, if it mellows Kavanaugh out and we don't get the ugly decisions that I anticipate are coming, I'll pay for the keg. I'm sure there'd be a lot of people who would help put a tap in, keep Kavanaugh juiced for the next 40 years on the Supreme Court if he doesn't repeal the 20th century. How about it? Is there an idea in that? I think it's actually a pretty damn good idea. Maybe one we should look into because I see lots of bad things coming unless we can sauce Kavanaugh up a little bit. Anyway, here to talk about what's going on in the world now that we are in the Kavanaugh era on the Supreme Court. Our good friend Scott Dworkin, a host of the Dworkin Report. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, how are you?
I'm good, but I like beer. Beer.
I've got a shirt with beer on it. Well, not beer itself, but it says beer on it, and it's got a head of a bear with antlers like a deer. So
there you go. So what do you think of the idea? We get a keg, we keep him sauced, no bad stuff happens.
I think that's when the bad stuff does happen, though. It seems. Then you see him flip out during his hearing as well. So, he'll don't worry. He just has to recuse himself from everything. There's nothing that he can actually sit on that I see would be fair. I don't see anything where he doesn't have a conflict. It's a disgrace. What I keep on reminding people is that when he's appointed by an illegitimate president, it makes him illegitimate as well. And if it's found out that Trump cheated and committed election fraud and conspired with Russia to win the election, then everyone should be removed from their position, and it should be unprecedented. And I'm telling you, like I've told everybody else before we had the Mueller probe and before we had anything else that was going on to anyone, that it all starts with, what we should do. It's got to start somewhere. But there wouldn't be a Mueller probe if people weren't poking around seeing what was possible for an investigation. And so, talk about removal, impeachment. I mean, it's not necessary between now and election. It just gives Republicans basically some meat to hit us back. And so, I don't think right now, I don't think that it's ever going to be out of the question for removal But it's going to have to involve some Republicans too, and probably some new information that surfaces, or more organized and real investigation.
Now, I understand the news today, of which you're actually part of. There were 15 complaints that John Roberts passed along to, a federal judge in Colorado, federal appeals court there in Colorado. Now, who knows what's going to happen? As I've been reading, the thought is that they'll look at it and they'll throw it out because they don't know what to do. But I understand one of your complaints, actually of the 15.
Yeah, so we submitted 2 different complaints, one for his perjury, and the other one later on for his Fox News interview. And so the way that it was set up, it's defined as propaganda and violating the Code of Judicial Ethics. So we filed those complaints via our attorney, Jay Whitfield Larrabee. And so there were very, very official, succinct complaints that I turned in person to the appeals court. And they took them very seriously. The problem being, though, they didn't entertain them quick enough, which they should have before his confirmation hearing. And they should have also waited to see where that led before, even having a hearing with them. But that was we wanted to make sure, just like we do with a lot of things, we filed, over, I think, close to 100 complaints on over 60 members of the Trump administration and Trump himself over the past 2.5 years. And some of those paper trails have ended up, leading to people's prison. And so we wanted to make sure that we just had a paper trail. We weren't sure where it would lead, and there is no precedent right now for him to be held accountable for the things that he did while he was an appeals judge. And now he wasn't serving on the bench when he did that, but you're representative of the bench at all times when you are a judge. So I think that it's valid. Well, there's a couple of things that can happen. One is they can throw him out, which I'd say, it would be easy for them to do. The next thing they can do, which is what Fox News is reporting, funny enough, is that he's actually being investigated through it. And so if they're taking it seriously like that, the worst thing that could happen to him is then they basically write up a recommendation of impeachment from either his appeals court, which he still apparently sits on until he resigns, or on the Supreme Court, which again, that's a really out there, probably not going to happen. But that is the worst thing that could probably happen, is a full investigation into him. Fox News is acting like that's happening. My guess is so that they can say that he was cleared when if it's dismissed.
That, and also to rile up the base by saying, look at what these liberal groups are doing. They're still torturing a good man.
And Bush appointee judge in Colorado.
Right.
That's who's got the case now, handed over by John Roberts on the, it basically, he sat on it, and now but again, that was just, again, to file the paper trail. It still is clear that he's unqualified, unfit for the Supreme Court, and shouldn't be there.
Right. But did Roberts have to turn that over? I mean, because I had read the other day that, these complaints were out there, but Roberts, not going anywhere. The confirmation already happened. The time for this would have been before the confirmation. Did he have to turn it over?
No, none of it. Like, it could have ended before Roberts. It didn't even have to go to him. So when they passed it off to him, that was one thing, and then when he passed it off to somebody else now, that was another thing. And so they have the option to stop this. Roberts could have just sat on it and just done nothing with it ever, and it would have just sat there forever. And that would have been probably the best tactic. So that does raise some questions about why he did do this. If he personally has some concerns over Kavanaugh being on the bench and wants it to be investigated to either clear him or know for a fact that what he represents, Roberts may not like the way that he looks on the Supreme Court and how he got there.
Yeah. No, I mean, because look, at the end of the day, it's Roberts' legacy. I mean, you want to talk about, ego and all of that, the ego of Kavanaugh. Roberts has got a similar, probably just as big, or if not bigger, ego, and looking at how he's going to be viewed through the lens of history.
Yeah, and Roberts will be the more like moderate, maybe more like a Kennedy kind of guy, because especially with his vote on healthcare, remember he said that it was a tax kind of thing, but he was the deciding vote there. And I think John Roberts is going to be the one thing that kind of keeps the Supreme Court from falling off the rails completely. And I think one of the things he wanted to do here is to take appropriate measure to make sure that it was taken seriously, because the letters and things like these are not normal things to happen in regards to conduct complaints. And again, this has nothing to do with the sexual assault allegations. This is completely separate on top of everything else that's happened. So and I think he takes perjury pretty seriously. And I think that the evidence is clear that he's lied multiple times under oath, 2004, 2006, and presently about the same situation, about stolen emails from Democratic senators and files. And the guy went to jail for it. He worked with a judge that had his own sexual misconduct claims against him that were viable, who was one of his representatives for, I believe, his 2004 confirmation hearings. He made himself very clear. We dug up some video of one of his confirmation hearings where he said he's a Republican, period. And this is the kind of nonsense that we're dealing with. They use it as a campaign. Now, the blowback from this, I think Republicans will feel it for years, because they did it wrong and they shouldn't have done this. And this gives a rallying cry from Democrats through 2020.
No, there's no question about that. And the polling on this, I mean, there's some polling already that shows that, the Democrats have gotten a little bit more energy out of this, because, and I think a friend of mine said, look, when people are happy, when things go their way, they don't stay engaged very long. But when you feel you've been wronged and you feel you've been cheated, you feel you've been backdoored, you remember that forever. And this is one of those moments where our Democrats are feeling a little chafed, and they're going to remember come November.
I mean, I'll tell you my personal story. In 2010, when we passed healthcare, I was really excited. I think it was like March or May or something, and I was like, "Oh, this is awesome! It's going to make it so that we keep in control, and like all this other madness, is going to subside, and we're going to really be able to take it to them." And then you follow that up with losing 60 seats a few months later, 60 plus seats, and then eventually 2 years later the Senate as well. And so history repeats itself. Now there's been a very big Republican onslaught in regards to campaigns, elections, but everything is kind of like the jig is up. The jig is up in regards to everything, including gerrymandering. They can't really gerrymander much more. It's just obscene at this level right now. They don't represent the American people, and they know it, but they're trying to act like it.
But what they're going to do, Scott, is what they did in Georgia. They kicked 561,000 people off the voting rolls. Right. And then they, another 53,000 they're not going to allow to vote, to process their registrations. You see it in Indiana, you see it in Kansas. They're just going to outright steal the election by not allowing people to vote. And you're going to have a Supreme Court who, just like they said the other day, allowed North Dakota to keep their voter ID law that basically excludes Native Americans. That's where it's going to go, and this is how they're going to hold on to power if we let them.
Yeah, and we at the Democratic Coalition, we're going to be filing a complaint with the Department of Justice, which of course is owned by Jeff Sessions. So I'm not sure how far that would go, but to make sure that it's clear that what he did was a violation of the Voting Rights Act, and the Civil Rights Division will have to take it up and respond, and there probably will be press coverage in regards to our filing of the complaint. Because it should be clear that, and we've done this, every election since 2016, 2017 elections. Anytime that there is vote fraud, I urge anybody to reach out to the Democratic Coalition and let us know. It doesn't matter what level it's at. We want to make sure that public pressure makes it clear that this is not going to be acceptable, especially in Georgia, where he is the Secretary of State. He controls, who gets to vote and who doesn't, and he's the one running for governor.
Yep.
That's too shady. I think that what he's already done and his staff, they belong in jail. What they're doing is voter suppression 101. And the fact that people, journalists and the American people in general, Georgian voters especially, they're not going to put up with this kind of madness. And I think you're right. They can't win alone. They can't win. They have no stances on issues. They want to call us mob or snowflakes or weak snowflakes. They want to call us weak, but then strong and scary and terrifying. You have Rand Paul's wife saying she has a loaded gun because she's scared of liberals. But at the same time, you have people calling us weak snowflakes. And like, make up your mind, because at the end of the day, what we are is we're Americans who care about our country, unlike their party who just want to suck up as much money as they can to spend on, you know, their golden toilet seats and all the other nonsense they want, expensive cheeses and their champagne popsicles that Ivanka's making. You know, I think that, again, like I said before, the jig is up. I don't think that any of these people are going to get away with it. And you know, you have to keep in mind that at the state level and the federal level, we will investigate everything. That I have a list. I have a list of thousands of different things, and I'm not joking. Thousands of different things that we have that we're going to assign to, as in like pass out to different members of Congress who represent different kinds of complaints and things that needed to be investigated, that we will make sure is investigated if Dems are to take control. Not only that, if we win control of different states in the governorships in Ohio and Georgia, in Florida, that is a great setup for 2022. And we need that for 2020 as well. We need that for 2020's groundwork.
Right.
It really, even just the House, 24 seats, even just the House flips, it is a nightmare for everyone that is a Republican, especially Donald Trump, because his tax returns come out, real investigations into Russia and the interference and the attacks on Americans. And that's the thing that's going to come out, is that Republicans and Trump helped Russia attack Americans individually. They attacked them via social media. They attacked them in person. They led to divisive rallies that were combating with each other, you know, basically trying to cause riots and disturbances in America. And apparently, you know, my guess is they helped organize things like Charlottesville. I mean, the point here being is they can't do it without cheating or help from other countries, because Americans don't support them because they don't represent America.
Yeah, that's a good point. You brought up Jeff Sessions a moment ago, and the Washington Post reported today that evidently Trump had conversations with Sessions' chief of staff, this guy Matt Whitaker, about replacing him. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's the whole thing is just a big scam, is what I would think at first. But then you look at, I remember when we were pushing for Mueller, or not Mueller specifically, but for a special counsel, and we didn't really know how it works. But the way we heard back and what we found out, it seems that Jeff Sessions is the one who pushed for Mueller in the first place. And it was because he had Senate meetings with Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, the former Russian ambassador, who was a Russian spy, obviously. But he sat down with him, and it basically was set up so that he was entrapped in a position where they were trying to talk about sanctions, and he refused. And it was under the impression that these conversations were recorded and all this madness. So he was very evasive with the Russians on that front. And I think he didn't fall for it. And he's one of the few. So he got Mueller, the one guy who, if you want to really get to the bottom of it, that's him. And I think at the end of the day, funny enough, that little troll, Jeff Sessions, may have been one of the people who saved our country. I mean, you know, he's still a racist.
But was he trying to save his own skin? I mean, at the end of this,
that's what
if the country gets saved, that's fine, well and good. It's his own skin that's most important.
Right, and that's what you're doing in that fact, because if you're assisting with making sure that's an independent investigation that's real, then you're not going to be accused of, oh, you were involved in the transition and everything else, and in the cover up. He could have been more negative towards everything. He could have helped shut down things. He could have done a lot of things in the past that he has not done. I do think that the little tiffs that they have between Trump and Sessions, I think all that is manufactured propaganda between the White House. It's just like the whole thing, like Nikki Haley leaving. Like, who cares? Why would it be what are you talking about? Like, why would it be yesterday? Why yesterday if you're leaving at the end of the year? Why that day specifically? You have a hurricane coming. You have elections coming. If she supported him, she would have stayed.
Yeah.
I know I didn't mean to transfer issues.
No, I was going to go there eventually anyway, because at the end of it, it seems curious that, the day after, the crew files, a complaint on her financial disclosures, that, all of a sudden, the woman who, who's got the, the $60,000 curtains, which I know the Obama administration okayed and it was coming anyway, but still, you would think that, very interesting that she leaves on that day.
I mean, 7 private plane flights. I mean, what are you doing? Like, you easily could take, I mean, you're a very senior ambassador and like a diplomat, and, it's not going to be hard for you to be able to get good flight. We want you to be able to travel the world to represent the United States. Like, we want you to do that. What we don't want you to do is meet with businessmen to talk about interests that are in your self-interest, so you can line your own pockets while being on their private planes, again, eating the champagne popsicles and living a lavish life. I'll tell you, I've been on, a couple private planes. They're terrifying. I don't like them at all. And I don't understand why they keep on. The same thing happened with, what's his name, Brock. I'm going to say the wrong name. Whoever the guy is at FEMA. I forgot. I'm blanking. But he took private plane flights. Zinke took private plane flights. And these are all so big of violations that the FEMA guy had to pay back the money for his flights. So my guess is Haley's going to be forced to pay back the money for those flights. They're going to act like it was, ethics snafu. But I will tell you this, 100% of the time, every single time, the thousands of people that I've looked into in the past 15 years, every single time that you find one thing, there's always more. Always.
Yeah. As soon as the floodgates open, man.
Always.
As soon as that door opens, and the guy's name was Brock Long.
That's good. Yeah.
So there you go. But here again, there's the talk that Nikki Haley's in some financial problems as well, and it's going to be playing into all of that as well. And again, as you point out, when you start looking, you find a bunch of stuff. And look, this administration, once the chapters are written, this will be the most corrupt administration in the history of this country, without question. The kleptocracy, I'm hoping we get to see just how bad it is. Before I let you go, I gotta ask about today's op-ed that the Washington Post, their fact checker, claimed that nearly every sentence in Trump's op-ed was false. Mm-hmm. So again, give him credit. He'd lie when the truth would be better, and he did it quite frequently in this op-ed against Medicare for All.
Yeah, I reached out to USA Today to ask to write a letter to the editor, some sort of response, because if you're going to let someone attack us, then especially with lies and propaganda, then we deserve a chance to respond. And so if the USA Today does not get back to me till tonight, then it will be published at the Washington Post, New York Times, or somewhere else. But I will write a rebuttal for the resistance here, because it was complete nonsense. All it was an attack on Americans for the most part, not even just Democrats, but singling them out to try and make it. I mean, like, who would actually let's strip it down. I always say, just strip it down. What are we actually saying? We're saying that we want everyone to be able to have health coverage. Like, we want everybody to have health care, and everybody to not be bankrupted from being taken care of in the hospital. And I think anybody that's against that is insane. I don't understand why anybody would be against everybody being able to have a fair shake at health care. I think it's a human right, and it's something that Americans deserve the best of, not a like go die in a ditch if you're not strong enough. I had run 2 marathons in 1 year in 2007 to 8. The campaign was 2 days away, and I ran a marathon, and it basically taught me. At the end of the marathon, I didn't know that I was running it with food poisoning, and I finished the marathon. It took me 6 hours and 37 minutes to finish the 26.2 miles. It was my second marathon in a year. It was a few hours longer than my other time, but I did it with food poisoning, and I didn't know that. Then I was put on meds, which was Cipro, meant to rebuild my body. Eventually, a few weeks later on Thanksgiving, I basically collapsed. And then I was hospitalized. I went into the hospital. She says, what's wrong with you? And I said, I don't know, but I haven't eaten in basically a week, and I haven't drank water in over 24 hours because I can't actually consume anything. They thought I was going to die. They were very clear about that. I was very lucky to have at least some type of insurance, but it made me realize that, I'm out there on the campaign trail. I'm, digging in, not having any problems with anything, and then bam, right in the face, you're immobilized, and you're realizing, like, I cannot take care of myself, and it can happen to anyone.
Yep.
At any time, for any reason, accidents and whatnot. And so we just need to make sure, is it so bad to take care of each other? Is it so bad for us to be able to help each other out?
Well, Scott, even if it's not that, even if it's not taking care of each other, take care of yourself. I mean, this is one of those moments where you go, I should have the best health care we can get. I should have the ability to see a doctor when I get sick. If my kids fall off their bike and break their arm, it shouldn't make us homeless. I mean, at some point, just the radical self-interest of, hey, I should be protected, should be at least the barest of minimums of what we see. And yet, I'm looking at people going, we don't need no health care. Because I actually know people who are going without it, and you go, what exactly are you doing? You're rolling the dice with your future.
And you made a great point there. Medicare for all is not the radical idea. The radical idea is go die in a ditch by yourself. The radical idea is, we're going to have an insurance market, and then everybody's going to have great choices, and it'll be fine. It's just another smoke and mirrors tactic, so that they can stave it off.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I don't think people want choices, man. Stop with the choices. People want to be covered when they're sick. People want to be able to go to the doctor when they're sick. They want to be able to take their kids to the doctor when they're sick, and they don't want to have to worry about going broke. I mean, this false choice. Oh, you could have all these choices. Look, there are tons of choices out there. The vast majority of them suck. And the reality is, I think people just want to make sure that they're covered. And I look at this op-ed that Trump put out, which is, basically pitting Granny against her grandchildren. They're taking your Social Security, Granny, and your Medicare. They're going to destroy it so that they can divvy it up amongst their greedy selves. Instead of saying, hey, how do we all do better? They're saying, see, look, screw those kids. You worked for it. You did it. It's yours. They're going to destroy yours. And, it plays to every bit of that op-ed plays to the worst of who we are.
Right. And I don't think that, I hope that a lot of people don't actually believe what's in there. But, the sad fact of the matter is they read the headline, and then they read maybe, a paragraph or two down. And it really is, it's something we'll look back at and be like, I can't believe anyone ever thought that way ever. They basically were fighting for the insurance companies and not for Americans. You are okay with, like you said, people just keeling over and dying and not having health care. I mean, the first thing that they asked me for, I don't even think I had my wallet on me. Got
your insurance card? Where's your insurance card? How are you going to pay us?
So they, that's what their number one concern was. Great hospital, got great coverage taken care of and all that, but there was a pause. There was a wait and see. We should never have to deal with that, especially, if you're a parent and you lose your job, your kids, what are your kids just going to rot? If your kid breaks his arm, if your kid gets the flu, or if your kid gets cancer, you know what I mean? Like, This is reality, and I think they live in some kind of, I guess it's delusional land, where they think that, you know, every man for himself, unless we're going to make money together.
Hooray for me and the heck with everyone else. And hey, if I get one of these crummy mini plans that doesn't carry anything, at least I got a cute card for my wallet. Yay.
That'll work, especially when you're bankrupt and don't have any credit.
Sad stuff.
That's what happens. And it takes not only that, keep in mind that, I mean, like I had emergency room services. I had the time that I had to be in there for surgery and procedures. I had the time that I was bedridden for over a month. And then I went and, you know, got to dance on stage at an inauguration with Obama, but I was on a lot of steroids at that point. And then I keeled over for about 6 months. So it takes time to recover, and you cannot plan that. You can't plan any illnesses. And the only thing that you can plan is making sure that you have a route to the hospital that's near you, or know where to go when you do get sick. But you can't plan for that. You can't plan for car accidents. You can't plan for random injuries in sports, and you can't plan for whatever's going to happen with your kids and your grandchildren and anything else. So if we actually care about Americans, then we do want everybody to have health care. And the fact that he's fighting against that is just another monstrous thing, like locking kids up in cages, or having a campaign rally in Pennsylvania while people are getting hammered with the largest hurricane ever on record in the continental United States.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And which is why, again, November is so important. And I'm hoping that people have it on their calendar, the string around their finger, whatever, to remember to vote on November 6th. Scott, I appreciate the time. As always, great talking with you.
Vote and tell your friends to vote. Keep on resisting. Don't take any of their junk. Don't stoop to their level. Try and keep the rhetoric to a minimum. Try not to engage with people if they're going to be vitriol, but keep pressing forward. The mud is thick. It's tough. The road is long, but it is worth it. I'm going to be on it for the next few decades. So we've got a long way to go, but we need to just keep on going forward. So thank you for having me, Rick.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Scott. As always, our good friend Scott Dworkin. Make sure you check out the Dworkin Report, his podcast. Fantastic stuff. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Champagne costs too much. Vodka puts my mouth in gear. While this little refrain should help me explain. As a matter of fact, I like beer. He likes beer. Last night I dreamed that I passed from the scene, and I went to a place so sublime.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day mill workers began to walk off the job at the Phoenix and Gilbert knitting mills in Little Falls, New York. The strike was sandwiched between the Bread and Roses strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and the 1913 Patterson textile strike. American, Hungarian, Polish, and Italian workers, over 70% of them women, struck against wage reductions. Their hours had just been cut from 60 hours a week to 54, and their wages adjusted accordingly. A recent Factory Inspection Commission investigation revealed deplorable working and living conditions, among the worst in the state. As a result, state legislators passed protective legislation restricting women's work hours. Many social reformers pushed for laws like these in the hopes of improving women's quality of life by minimizing their exploitation on the job. But the reduction in hours spelled disaster for these mill women, who then faced a loss of income that ranged between 75 cents and $2 a week. Socialists in nearby Schenectady, including the socialist mayor George Lunn, arrived in town and were promptly arrested for giving open-air speeches in support of the strikers. IWW organizers soon followed to help organize picketing, daily strike parades, and strike committees for each of the factories. They quickly established IWW Local 801, the National Industrial Union of Textile Workers. By the end of the month, mounted police closed in on the women strikers and began clubbing them, many into unconsciousness. The The police raided strike headquarters and arrested IWW strike committee leaders. But the women strikers stood strong and were celebrating victory by the end of the year. They won full reinstatement and 60 hours pay for 54 hours work.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Speaking of leaving town, thank goodness Trump out of Pennsylvania. It's been the fifth time he's been in Pennsylvania since June. He was in Erie tonight. Stay away. Go away. Although I gotta say, if him coming here continues Scott Wagner running probably the worst campaign that I've ever seen, and ensures that he is not anywhere near the governor's mansion, not even as a visitor, maybe it's okay. Because look, Barlotta's not lighting the world on fire. Wagner's tripping over his, well, whatever. And it's not looking good for the Republicans, even when Trump spends, well, all of his time here in the state. I can't wait for November. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be here. Yeah, it looks like this speech, or the rally tonight, rather, may not have taken place. It looks like it was heading in that direction at a certain point this afternoon. But the president was asked a number of times and very forcefully said that, they're going to take a look at it, but he's almost positive they're going to be moving forward with this rally. This was something that he said he owed to the thousands of people who he said were lining up around the block to see his speech, saying that they had been coming in from out of town and staying overnight to try to get a glimpse of him, and that he just couldn't possibly let them down, even though there is a major hurricane ravaging the Florida Panhandle. So, we've seen the president previously cancel rallies in the face of Hurricane Florence, but, this time around with a couple of hours, advance notice, and the fact that this is a swing state and, sort of an audience that he particularly wants to, speak to, this was decided to, let this move forward and take place.
There you go. Well, at the end of it, like I said, if it means that Wagner keeps running the crummy campaign that he's running and Barlotta has no traction whatsoever, bring it on there, Donnie. Keep coming, because it's not helping.
Well, this also probably helps us in a small sense, in the sense that, this is pretty much one of the president's primary psychological boosts. We know that when he doesn't really go on the, campaign trail, and when he doesn't have the, throngs of people screaming, lock her up and whatnot, he starts to, act out. So, maybe this is for the best in a number of other ways as well.
Yeah, it gives him something to do and keeps his ego bloated and yeah. So look, I'm not against it either. And look, there's always tons of great footage of the less than brilliant, and the nonsense that they pull while going to these rallies that for days afterwards you get to sift through.
Yeah, and, from the president himself, when he is fired up, he has a habit of sort of setting the agenda for the following day. Last time he had the rally, he really came close to almost harpooning the Kavanaugh vote. He made some comments that just did not rub some senators the right way, and gave people like you and me another day's worth of talking points, even though those were pretty horrifying on the face of it. So who knows what we'll be talking about tomorrow morning. I'm sure there's going to be a lot to sift through, and this is not the last rally he's going to be attending this month. And next couple of days, I believe he's going to 2 more. So he has a pretty busy campaign schedule.
Yeah, now wasn't he just in Iowa where he was talking about ethanol? Didn't Republicans used to hate ethanol?
Yeah, that was the thing, but now that Chuck Grassley's his best friend, it's not necessarily that surprising. And, of course, the president has to make this a message about farmers. He is constantly running, even though he isn't, jumping into the fray again until 2020. So this was his way to tie this into, the whole make farming great again idea. And this isn't too far off from a lot of things that we've seen from Republicans previously. Usually any sort of conservative ideology is put on hold as soon as you start discussing farmers. This is true for subsidies. This is true for ethanol. That's something that as soon as you start speaking to, the farmers or those in Iowa, that stuff just usually kind of gets thrown out the window. So not too surprising to see that shift here.
Yeah, but it's always interesting to me. The farmers are usually the most conservative group, and yet the most one against welfare and all that. You have the largest recipients of welfare in the country, and you always go, wow, hypocrisy much? No, just a lot.
Yeah, who did it, right?
I mean, but we deserve it. We work for it. Okay, yeah, But I found it odd because Republicans were generally against ethanol, and most of my conservative friends were completely against it until here recently when they're not. So
that's just sort of how this usually goes, and it's been that way for quite some time. And that's something if we're gonna, I guess, slow down your show, we're talking about ethanol is something that goes through both sides. It's not the most environmentally clean proposal, but we have seen, Democrats support it when it means winning an election in Iowa in a swing, or not a swing year, in a primary season, and that goes back at least to 2008 with Obama. So not too surprised to see that changing around there. But
at the beginning, I was in favor of it. At the beginning, when they were saying, "Hey, this is a way for sustainable, renewable energy," and and then I found out how bad it is for our cars, and just how it drives up the price of corn and all of that. I'm going, well, shouldn't we eat that instead? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough topic.
Yeah, it just is. I just find it interesting that the whole hypocrisy thing, where I try and stay somewhat within the middle of the road and say, if I say something during the Bush administration, like tariffs is a perfect example. All during the Bush years and all during the Obama years, I was saying, we need tariffs on China. We need some type of enforcement to bring our trade deficits down. Now Trump's actually doing it, and the people who were with me during those times, not so much. And yet I'm still consistent in saying, look, I don't like the guy doing it, and I think he's going to booger it up so that we never talk about tariffs again. But at some point, we've got to do something about our trade deficit with China. So I'm in favor of trying it. But a lot of folks not thrilled at all. So there is that. Let's move on. The White House has acknowledged that there are some high-level talks with the Saudis over the missing journalist, who I guess we assume has been hacked up and taken out the back door.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a tragic and shocking case when you look at the facts that the Turkish government has put on the table for this. But the president yesterday said that he had no information about this, that he knew as much as everybody else, which was nothing, and that he had no updates. And then today he almost reluctantly, I guess, let slip out that he has had very high-level talks with Saudi officials over this. When we were in the Oval Office today, somebody asked him, have you spoken to the Saudis about this? And he said, well, I really would prefer not to say, but yes, I have. And then sort of let it all move forward there. And what we're getting now is a total reversal from the White House over how exactly they've been handling this, which, make no mistake, is a very tricky geopolitical issue. But, instead of just saying, I've seen nothing and backing away from it, we now have the president saying that there have been high-level talks, that the U.S. is going to get to the bottom of it, and then the press secretary letting us know that John Bolton has apparently been having behind-the-scenes discussions with the Saudi Crown Prince, that Jared Kushner has been doing that, and that Mike Pompeo has been following up on calls as well, and that this is a much broader administration push than we, realized just one day ago. When the president avoided that question and when Mike Pompeo, came out and gave us a little statement and refused to take any questions on that. So a lot can change, and it kind of, I guess, shows a few things. One, how pressure can kind of impact the administration, and two, just sort of the fact that they aren't necessarily the fastest on the uptick when it comes to these major issues as well, and at least crafting a message on things that actually make sense beyond just sheer optics and sheer brutal politics.
Yeah, and it appears like they're just winging it, and they don't actually know what they're doing. But part of me goes, how much of this plays into the whole, because evidently there's some strife between us and the Saudis on the oil front. The Trump administration has told the Saudis they want more production. The Saudis have said no, it's not a production problem, it's a speculation problem. So from what I've been led to believe, there's some tension there, and this can't help.
Well, and this is also, coming up against a lot of resistance in Congress. We had Senator Bob Corker, who's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, calling for an investigation via the Maginski Act. This was signed by all of the Republican members of the committee except for Rand Paul. And from there, we also have a lot of sticking points when it comes to arms deals, when it comes to certifications for Saudi activity in Yemen for the civil war that's going on there, and the support and the proxies that we're seeing there. So this is a very big issue, and one where you would expect hopefully to have sort of a nuanced hand with it, but instead we have Trump, who sort of I guess accidentally reveals his hand in the Oval Office, and it was just an interesting scene. It actually resulted in a round of laughter just based on how
he's getting laughed at a lot here lately, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean that's kind of a thing, and this didn't really seem like a laugh line. This was just one of those things where you couldn't really help but just realize that this is real life, and just be kind of shocked by that.
Yeah, I look every day. I wake up with that same feeling every day. And let's move on. I guess FBI Director Christopher Wray has come out and said that there was some involvement by the White House in the Kavanaugh probe. Are we surprised by any of that?
Yeah, so this was during testimony on the Hill today. He said that there was efforts from the White House to limit the scope of the investigation, and then said that this was something that is not necessarily out of the ordinary and typically is what the FBI has to deal with in terms of constraints for anytime they go back at an issue that's been, that reaches back a number of years. But either way, this counters the claim that the White House put forward a number of times in which they said, basically, look, we're going to give the FBI free rein on this. We've transmitted that message to them numerous times, and now the first time we've had a public statement from the head of the FBI, that just seems to counter it. And of course, in the larger picture, we love relitigating the 2016 election, 2 years after the fact. Now we have a Supreme Court justice with a lifetime appointment, one that's directly tied to, both Trump and Trumpism. So luckily, this is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with for years and years and years and years. So there you go.
Yeah, my grandchildren will probably know about it. We'll most certainly have to live under this, and that not a good thing in my view, because this week is the beginning of the Kavanaugh era, as they've begun hearing cases already, right?
Yeah, so far it's been, there aren't major front page hot button issues that are moving forward right now, but there have been a couple of things that have been put forward that I don't believe he's had his official name on for. I'm trying to remember what they've been dealing with. One of them was a three strikes issue when it comes to gun ownership. But as this moves forward, this is going to be a bigger issue, and this is the Kavanaugh era. We know that he is going in there as somebody who has publicly thanked the president, publicly attributed his rise to the president, and that's something shocking. And the larger fact in all of this is that now John Roberts is considered to be the swing vote that progressives or liberals can try to find some kind of hope in, and that's a pretty dismal thought.
Yeah, don't hold your breath on that one. I'm not. which again is another reason why this election cycle so very important. And finally, you got to see 9 Inch Nails last night.
Oh, yep, got to. Yep, that was after a day of bleakness covering the White House, it was good to go see something emotionally uplifting like 9 Inch Nails. That was a wonderful transition.
Yeah, good for you. No, being from Cleveland, the band was founded there, and I years and years and years ago, I had heard of them there, and then obviously they rose to mega fame. But good for you, good for you. You need a little bit more in your life than just Trump in the White House.
Yeah, I mean this was a good addition, and it's always good to feel like a bratty, angsty teenage boy again. And considering I've been on tour since 2009, this was the perfect time for that to come out.
Good for you. Good for you. You need a break every once in a while. It's always great to talk to you, Justin. Thanks so much, man.
Oh, sucks. Thanks, Rick.
Our good friend Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. I think I need to do something like that here soon. Just one of those breaks from reality, one of those things that you go, oh, screw all the nonsense going on in politics and live your life for a moment. You need that every once in a while. At least I think so. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
The task is extremely urgent, and it's something that scientists all agree on.
The world's scientists issue an alarming report warning we are almost out of time to act on global warming. And speaking of which,
this storm will be life-threatening and extremely dangerous.
Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas brace for Hurricane Michael.
All of those bracing stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
To limit warming to 1.5 degrees C, we would need to start taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere during the 21st century.
Oh, I'm holding my breath that will happen. See what I did there?
Yes, we see what you did there.
This is your Green News Report.
I'm gonna soak up the sun.
Okay, Desi Doyen, not easy to be snarky about this report from the UN. And even as it comes out, news of yet another destructive hurricane coming out of almost nowhere in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes, as we go to air, Hurricane Michael in the Gulf of Mexico has quickly intensified into a major hurricane, as so many hurricanes now do these days. It's headed for Florida's Gulf Coast as a Category 3, possibly 4, giving residents very little time to prepare. Florida Governor Rick Scott has declared a state of emergency for Florida's Panhandle. Hurricane Michael will bring life-threatening storm surge to Florida and heavy rains all the way into Georgia and even the Carolinas, which are still grappling with the aftermath of Hurricane Florence. And in another weird development in this extremely weird 2018 Atlantic hurricane season, for the second year in a row, a hurricane is menacing Ireland and Europe. According to Weather Channel meteorologist Marshall Shepard, a tropical storm in the far North Atlantic is, quote, not normal, folks.
Yeah, but you know what has become normal? The idea that there's a whole group of people, specifically in this country, specifically on the right, who continue to deny that what is going on is unprecedented, is dangerous, and yes, is caused by man. This continues to be disturbing, even though it continues to be these right-wing southern states that seem to be bearing the brunt of the damage here.
And speaking of bearing the brunt, our big story today, the world has 12 years to get man-made climate change under control. That's according to an international team of scientists on the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. The IPCC's chilling new climate science report, released on Monday, finds that the severe impacts of climate change that were once expected projected several decades into the future, will begin to hit within 20 years, by 2040, just 22 years from now, and at a much lower temperature increase of just 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. Humans have already warmed the planet 1 degree Celsius, and we're already seeing the consequences in extreme weather and rising sea levels.
I recall during the negotiations over the Paris Climate Agreement, there was a lot of talk about the idea that keeping warming to no higher than 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial times was not going to be enough, that we had to target 1.5 degrees, and now the UN scientists seem to be yelling and screaming that exact same thing.
Yes, this report specifically compares the differences in impacts that we're likely to see if we take aggressive action now to avoid overshooting that 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature target versus the higher target of 2 degrees Celsius in the Paris Climate Agreement. They say the longer we wait, the more limited our options will be. On current trends, we are likely to sail past that 1.5 degrees Celsius mark by 2030. That's within the next 12 years.
Donald Trump could still be president.
At a press conference on Monday, IPCC scientist Ho Sung Lee was blunt.
Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is not impossible, but will require unprecedented transitions in all aspects of society. Every bit of warming matters.
We will still see an increase in the intensity and frequency of drought, floods, forest fires, and extreme heat waves, along with sea level rise, crop failures, and water shortages. But the scientists say if we take those steps to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, those impacts won't be nearly as bad, with huge benefits for humanity, food security, water security, and species and ecosystems that we rely on all around the world. They also found that the cost of making the transition is far, far cheaper than the cost of the impacts that we face. It's a monumental task, they say, but major efforts are already underway in most countries to reduce carbon emissions and transition away from fossil fuels, according to IPCC scientist James Skee.
But this progress needs to be picked up in other areas such as transport or land management.
Half of our energy by 2050 would have to come from renewable sources. We'd have to plant millions of trees to remove carbon from the air and do more. But the upshot is that we can do this, we have the tools, but we must move faster. The scientists say that requires the political will to take action in all countries.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascist or bound?
Well, evidently at the rally this evening, Donald Trump in Erie said that he can no longer say, I'm going to get the girl. He's going to get the person, he said, because you Me Too people have ruined getting the girl for me. I used to be able to go and grab him by the you-know-what. Now, well, no more. Oh, jeez. Can you believe this disgrace? This disgraces our president. And finally, for the evening, the guy who shot Tamir Rice, you may remember his name as Timothy Loman. Evidently, the Bel Air, Ohio Police Department was actually going to hire him as a policeman until there was just mass outrage. And I guess now the Timothy Loman has withdrawn his application and will not be a policeman at the Bel Air Police Department. And you go, did the chief not think this through? And, you know, what favor was that? There's a guy who should never have a gun again and should never wear a uniform. Just saying. Anyway, if you missed any of tonight's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like time flood beneath the lunar sway.